So hello and welcome. Happy Friday. Today's Friday, June the 3rd, and this is episode number 161 of Backyard Beekeeping Questions and Answers. And my name is Frederick Dunn, and this is the way to be. So it's sunny outside, 71 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 22 Celsius. And there's a lot of opportunity to go out there and do some work in the bee yard. But, see, I'd rather be here talking with you and answering your questions that we did not do last Friday because I did other things instead, like made more videos with me out in the bee yard. And I know that's a lot of fun. I'd like to be out there right this minute, but we have questions to get through. I think there's more than 13 of them. If you want to know what we're going to talk about today, please look down in the video description and line item by line item, the questions are in order. There's also links down there that will help you out. Some of the topics that we're covering today are fairly involved, so there are links taking you to further study and information. And what else can we tell you? That's about it, I think. So it's also available as a podcast, Podbean, The Way to Be. And my website is thewaytobee.org, so you can check in there and see what's going on. First question today comes from Ross from Hillsborough, New Hampshire. Want to try single brood management like Ian Stepler is doing up north. Now, sidebar on that, because Ian Stepler, I haven't watched his video yet, but I understand he just got nailed by another big flood situation, heavy rain, 6 inches or more, something like that. And he's got another heavy setback. That is the Canadian Beekeepers vlog, I believe it's called. So if you want to check in with Ian and send him your support, tell him you're thinking about him. I'm sure that every little bit helps in that circumstance up there. Anyway, I added a second brood box to allow for expansion and to allow them to build more comb. They built out the comb, and the queens have laid up at least 7 out of 10 frames in about 1.5 weeks. That's about 2 weeks ago. As of May 26th, there was plenty of capped brood on the second box frames. And you want to check out the videos. There's a link here for the video to see what's going on. The question is, should I shake the bees down to the bottom box and put the excluder under the second box? I know I can find the queen and move her down as well. The question is when. Okay, so that leads me to something, a tool that we should all be familiar with as beekeepers. Shaking the bees down. Now, there are a lot of reasons why you might want to get bees out of an upper box. One is, of course, at the end of the year, when we start packing down our hives for wintertime, we have to get them out of the honey supers also so you can extract honey. And he says, shake them down. Shaking them down is going to be a tough sell. Hard to do. There are a lot of reasons why that's hard. First of all, you can get bees out of a honey super fairly easy. But if they've got brood up in the upper boxes, getting them down and out of that is not going to be easy, and it's not going to be something you can just shake them out of. But we want to use something called a bee escape. So getting the queen out of there, good idea, because that means it will get rid of eggs and developing larvae up there and bees in their pupa state. And then they'll be willing to move down below, and you get your nurse bees down there. But use a bee escape. That's what I recommend. This is my favorite one. Bee escapes have been around for a long time. The whole purpose of it is to put this on top of your brood box in this case, or double brood if that's what you're using. And then your honey supers are up above. And if you notice the little cones that are here, the bees have a one-way pass through those. They come out here. Now you'll notice that there are bee escapes that are made out of wood, and you'll see a triangle configuration under here. But the thing that I want you to notice about that design is there's a screen hole in the middle where the bees pass through, but if you notice this one's vented all over. That one is solid wood with the exception of the screen in the middle and the triangles, so the bees actually figure out pretty quickly how to get back up through it and into the upper boxes, again defeating the purpose of getting them out. Also, you don't want to leave these on for a long time. Bees are smart. They figure stuff out, but the other thing is we want to not stress them with this piece of equipment. The reason that I like this one, or one that you even make yourself, is that notice there are screens and openings all over the place. And that's because once the bees are down below, they can smell the honey and everything up above. So they'll come to these slatted areas and not necessarily work really hard at getting back through these cones. So that's why these work better, and these generally work in clearing the upper boxes in 24 hours or less. So, and who makes it? This is called The Great Escape. It's by a company called Ceracell, C-E-R-A-C-E-L-L, The Great Escape. This is the 8-frame size. I like the 10-frame size. Last year they were out of them. But that's what I recommend for getting your bees down out of the upper boxes. And again, they're going to be stubborn if there's brood in the upper boxes. Now, those of you who follow the way I configure my hives, I have the deep brood box, I have a medium super minimum, and that has to be full of honey before I move the honey supers that I will use, that will take off later, flow hives, things like that. And then I don't use a queen excluder. One of the reasons also that the queen excluder isn't necessary for the way I configure my hives is because it's based on what we observe in feral colonies of bees, unmanaged colonies. Where's the honey? It's all up above. Where's the brood? It's all down below. Why? Because down below is where the entrance is, a single entrance, no top venting. So if you've got an upper entrance and you've got upper venting, then likely there'll be brood spread throughout your hive if you're not using a queen excluder. So if you choose not to use a queen excluder, again, it's reinforced that you should have a single entrance down below, no top venting, no upper entrance, and then the bees will lay it out without problems. There'll just be honey up above, brood down below. And that's pretty much it for that one. We'll move right along. And so I didn't realize Ian is a deep single brood box beekeeper. But I guess so, because he has to load them on pallets and get them into his big fancy building and keep them sheltered through winter under controlled environmental circumstances there. And that's because where Ian Stepler lives, aside from the terrible heavy rains that he's getting, he has winters that just bees are not sustained there. Somebody asked him if there are feral colonies of bees in his neck of the woods up in Canada there. He says there are none. So the environment is hostile to bees. They just can't make it, so he has to put them in that building. But he's doing that, according to that question, with single deeps. Next question, number 2, comes from Kevin. And thank you for all the great information. On May the 12th, I installed my 2 packages of Saskatraz bees into 10-frame Langstroth deep boxes. All new equipment, Acorn, heavy waxed frames. So Acorn is plastic foundation, heavy wax. Any heavy wax foundation has a very good chance of being used by the bees. And I kept the landing board entrances on the smallest setting of the wooden reducer. In my rush to get them in the hives, I left the small, same size as the landing board entrance, up. On the inner cover open on the hives, and the bees in that hive use the upper entrance much more than the landing board entrance. Would you recommend closing it? And if so, what time of day would be best to eliminate that entrance? Late in the evening to avoid confusion to the foragers. So here's the thing, once they get established using any opening, and this, by the way, could be an opening that's chewed by a carpenter bee, which happened last year on the side of one of my beehives. Carpenter bees chew holes in the wood. It thought it was getting into a deeper piece of wood so it can lay its eggs, and instead it just made a side entrance to the beehive. So anyway, any time is a good time to close that upper entrance, of course, because if you go up there at nighttime, then you're going to have bees flying out at night. They can't see well, and then they're going to be on the ground, and they're going to cling to everything, and they're going to crawl on you and everything else. So I think during the daytime is going to be best for closing up that upper entrance or making any configuration changes, because most of your foragers are out. Will it frustrate them? Yeah, because they're going to go right to the same opening where they thought the opening should be, and it's going to take them a while to figure it out, follow pheromones, and get through the proper entrance later. So that will work, and do it during the daytime. As I said, at nighttime you open the hive, make changes, you have bees flying out blind. Number 2, it says the hive with the inadvertent upper entrance seems to be much more active than the other hive. And they're consuming close to twice the amount of 1-to-1 syrup from the rapid round feeder as the other hive. Is this just a difference in beehive behavior between the 2 colonies and a sign of colony being a bit stronger than the other, or a sign or a larger issue? You mentioned that your Saskatraz bees are prolific honey producers. Does that correlate to them being above average honey consumers? Well, We know that the honeybees are using energy to keep your brood warm. If it's not 94 to 97 degrees Fahrenheit on the outside, then they're going to be warming something on the inside. And their normal activity, the bee's body generates heat in general, so they're going to be warming that upper box, but where's the heat going? Out the upper entrance, out the vent. So even in summertime, unless the temperature is really high, like right here, look at our temperature today, we're in the 70s. So that means even on a sunny day, which seems warm to us, it seems like we should be all set, so the bees should be all set. But actually, if you've ever opened a hive on a hot day, like in the 70s, and you pass your hand over the frames where the brood is concentrated, it'll feel like a little heater's going on there, and it'll feel like a little blower because they're moving that heat through those hives and keeping the brood ventilated. So what happens when there's an upper entrance even on these warm days? This is why I'm explaining my own thinking, on why I don't use upper entrances even in summertime. And that's because unless we're in the 90s, they're venting it off. Now here's the other problem. Let's say it is in the 90s where you are. Upper entrance seems logical, to vent things off. There's another side to that, and I want you to think about it. It just struck me right now while I'm thinking about the configuration. So if you have an upper vent, and you're in a dry region, desert Southwest, for example, where it would likely be hot. Another problem that the bees have is, of course, they're going to use water to cool things down, but they're fighting against dehumidification in the hive because open brood needs to be kept humid as well as warm. Where's the humidity going? Up and out through that upper entrance. So there again, now they have to continually bring water resources into the hive to cool the hive, which they're going to do anyway through a single entrance. They've demonstrated that they can do that in extreme environments, by the way. So the water gets used, energy gets used to do that, and they're losing their humidity, so they have to constantly reinforce that with water brought in from outside. So there are a lot of challenges, and that's why it's always interesting to me when I see somebody who does cutouts, rip-outs, finds bees in feral locations. We can't really do a lot of evaluating when we have a bee tree. There's quite a few bee trees around. But when they move into the uninsulated walls of an old structure, so plaster lath on the inside, there's no insulation there, and then clapboards on the outside, no insulation there. And that's not even as thick as a standard beehive, by the way. And they winter over in those spaces. And there'll be the tiniest single entrance down at the bottom. Everything else is propolised, sealed up. And on the hottest days, because they like to build on south-facing and southeast-facing and east-facing walls. Those are the hottest walls when the sun's beating down on that building. So actually, bees demonstrate they can vent and keep up with things just fine without the upper entrance, even in hot locations. So I think the upper vented one, they're consuming more resources because they're using more resources to keep up with their brood. They're keeping humidity up, they're keeping water in there. All of these things consume energy, and cooling the hive consumes energy as well. So that might be one reason why they're using more resources in the hive. Question number 3, moving on, Michael from Maryland. Being a backyard beekeeper, when is it a good idea and worth the hassle to transition to starting a company or LLC? Why would a backyard beekeeper who sells honey and or products need the protection of an LLC or being a business? Okay, first of all, I'm not a business manager or advisor. And I do have 2 businesses, by the way, and there are a lot of reasons for doing that. But you can check with your Department of Agriculture, first of all, if you're selling honey. What is required if you're selling honey direct sales? So in other words, I'm not a business yet. This is a sideline. So if you have a bunch of beehives and you end up generating a bunch of honey and resources from your hives and you think, wow, I could sell this and it's actually worth quite a bit. It doesn't take higher math to figure out that if right now in the state of Pennsylvania, a quart of honey retails for $23 a quart. So if you're generating hundreds of pounds of honey and you want to put that in jars and do direct sales, your Department of Agriculture will define where the break is. When do you become a business and when do you remain a sideliner? So you start there, finding out, is your production level high enough? The other thing is, what is the point of limited liability corporation? So you always see the name limited. And that's generally because you want to insulate yourself, your personal holdings, your personal property, your personal possessions, your bank accounts, and everything else from your business. And that's why it's limited liability. It's an LLC. And so you want to start thinking about that because that could protect you. Now, what are the risks? So it's a very good idea to talk to, a family member or friend who has a small business. Those who are selling honey already. There are a lot of reasons why backyard beekeepers might consider insurance as well. The point is to protect your assets. Protect your assets. So what are the risks? If you're not following the rules, you are at risk. And I'm not sure that being an LLC will protect you from breaking the law. So what you start out with, because I did some searching around to find out who's been sued, what were the issues, what were the problems, what did the insurance cover? And several beekeepers have been sued. Some communities have been sued. There's a $5 million lawsuit that I was looking into. The community was being sued because a beekeeper was keeping their bees on a vacant lot. I believe this is San Diego. And the vacant lot was not belonging to the beekeeper, and he just parked his bees there, and has been doing it for a long time, but it goes against city ordinances. And here's the other thing. The city received complaints about the beekeeper, about the bees being there, and the city did not do anything about it. Then, predictably, someone who's allergic to bees, who had been filing complaints with the city, someone did get stung, someone in their 50s, and died from anaphylaxis. So the person was allergic to bees, got stung, and died. So who are they going after? The $5 million lawsuit is against the city because they failed to enforce their own restrictions on beekeeping. The individual beekeeper was not sued, but let me tell you something, that's a terrifying potential event. If you're the beekeeper in the vicinity and somebody is allergic to bees and you have violated any regulations, so that's, you have to dot your I's and cross your T's, because if someone brings a suit against you, you can make all the arguments you want. How do you know there's my bees? How do you know they came from my hive? How do you know they came from my apiary? I'm really sorry that your friend passed away, but I don't think those were my bees. You better be legal at what you're doing with your bees. So you start there also. And you need to check in with your homeowner's insurance. So if you're a renter, you need to check your renter's insurance. But if you're a homeowner, you need to check with your homeowner's policy, as I did here. So for example, I'm a photographer. I take portraits. What happens when I bring people on my own property, which often happens, to take portraits? What if someone is allergic and they get stung by a bee that belongs to me? The likelihood that the bee that stung that person would come from my apiary is high. So, am I covered? Yes, thank goodness, I am. However, the minute I start bringing people on this property, which is why my Way to Bee Academy is paused for an undetermined amount of time, my insurance just goes crazy. If you bring people here, and these are beekeepers, you bring people here to learn about beekeeping, and if that's the intent, and they're going to be wearing bee suits, and they're going to be getting into beehives, and they're going to be learning to manage bees, and someone gets stung, and someone may not have even known that they were allergic to bees, we get a medical emergency, and at the very least, there's a lot of medical expenses associated with that event if they're allergic to bees. Who gets sued, and am I covered? Well, if I'm teaching about bees, and that becomes a part of my business, then now I need insurance coverage just for that. And the amounts are ridiculous, depending on where you live. And this is why I'm stalled. So the only way for me to avoid having to pay insurance or establish a limited liability corporation, which again, establishing an LLC won't protect you unless you're lawful. So even when you do that, you have to have insurance for your business. See how it goes? It can be an expense, it can be ridiculous. But as far as being able to sell your stuff and whether or not you want to insulate yourself by creating this separate corporation, which means that if something happened to that, they get all those assets. And they list everything, all your hive equipment, all your bees, all the honey extraction stuff, and your marketing, materials and things like that would all be taken. Your computers, whatever else is listed as part of your LLC, that's at risk. Your personal account, your home, your property, things like that, then of course will be protected, and that's the purpose of it. Again, you need to consult with someone who's a legal expert in your area. I'm just giving general advice here. But when you, as a backyard beekeeper, this leads us into the insurance category of things. And we just had a discussion with the Pennsylvania Game Commission, who talked about beekeepers, and when they suffer a loss, they can file a claim. So let's say you're a backyard beekeeper and you've got an apiary and you've got 10 hives, just random number. And a bear comes through, and you didn't even put up an electric fence. You didn't do anything to protect your apiary. Bear comes through, destroys everything, chews up, wrecks everything. It's a huge bear. And now you would really love to get some of your money back because let's say Dr. Leo's, Land's hive was one of them, and that's a $400 hive. And then you had flow hives out there, and the bear tore apart your flow supers, and those are $400 a piece, and on, and the price keeps racking up. You get compensated for that. Did you know that? The Game Commission has funding here to come and compensate the beekeeper for their losses once. And they tell you all the things that you need to be doing. You need to have an electric fence. You need to have all of this. And they have very specific guidelines on what kind of electric fence you need. And the beehives have to be within 300 feet of your house or something like that. So if you've got an out yard or you're on the next block, those aren't covered. So you would have corporate insurance for limited liability corporation that would cover potential losses like that. And you need to look for a company that specializes in beekeeping as well, so they understand what those requirements are. So because there's a lot of reasons you could lose all your hives. You have a big investment out there, not just, it's livestock. So we are under the Department of Agriculture when we keep honeybees. Honeybees are looked upon as livestock, just like cows and chickens and everything else, which is also the umbrella under which beekeeping falls in a lot of communities where they don't have a specific bee guideline. What they use is very loosely worded stuff that says no agricultural practices, no livestock will be kept within, whatever your area is, your township, your municipality, whatever it is. And so you need to be aware of what those regulations are, because then you find out they just blanket cover well bees are part of that because they're under the Department of Agriculture. So it's nutty stuff. So you need to be protected from personal injury. If you sell honey to somebody and they give it to a baby under the age of 1 and you didn't caution them about that, and that 3-month-old baby is being given raw honey from the parent and they get botulism from it because their gut bacteria is not developed enough to manage that yet. That's why the 1-year-old child is the cutoff. That's something that probably should be on your label. You have to look at labeling requirements for your state. So everything has a rule associated with it. So losses against pesticide use, everything. Anyway, it insulates you from being sued, and insurance and so on insulates you from profound losses such as Ian Stepler is going through right now. And I don't know what his insurance thing is. So when you look for an insurance company, by the way, Fred, can you recommend an insurance company for beekeeping? No, I won't, because now I get associated with that company, and if they don't take care of you, well, Fred told me to get that company. So I suggest that you read reviews from the company. I suggest you make sure that you're in their area of coverage. When these national companies advertise on Google and everything else and say, let us insure you, check with the Better Business Bureau. See what kind of relationship they have with your state. Find out from people who had claims how well the company handled it and what your deductibles are and things like that. So your first stop, of course, check the insurance policies you already have, homeowner, renter, whatever you are, and see what you're covered for. Explain what you do. I sell honey at the end of my driveway. Probably the most benign thing you could be doing. But you want to know the regulations just in case. And it took me quite a while to find, by the way, any successful lawsuits against individual beekeepers. That was extremely rare, and I was pretty happy about that. But beekeepers need to be responsible and careful. So, question number 4 comes from Robin from Lancaster, Ohio. Do foraging bees collect nectar and pollen at the same time, or do they collect one or the other? We have a strong flow on right now, and I'm seeing a lot fewer bees with pollen pants returning to the hive. Thanks as always. Okay, so, and we're all told, in fact, a lot of us teach it. When you're talking to elementary school kids in particular, we say that bees go to flowers. Why do they go to the flower? They go to the flower because there's nectar. The nectar is a sweet reward, okay? So that's sucrose. And the sweeter the nectar, the more bees are going to go to it. And the more abundant the nectar, the more bees are going to go to it. And then those tricky flowers get pollen on the hairs of the bees. So even the bees' eyes are covered in hair. And I think that's to protect their eyes from getting pollen sticking to it. But you could also say that even their eyes are designed to collect pollen. And then they groom it back and they collect it. So they're collecting pollen sometimes. Sometimes they don't care about the pollen. It's a byproduct. The plant needs the bee because this plant likes that plant over there. And because they're rooted in the ground, they can't get over there to make out. So they need a bee as a go-between to transfer the pollen and make out for them so that plant can reproduce through its pollen, right? So you take the pollen, that's, like sperm that's going to the other plant, which is going to receive it and become impregnated and produce fruit. So we're told that they're attracted by the nectar, pollen is secondary. But actually, you'll see bees, because bees need pollen sometimes for their own brood, and they can be picky about it if there's a lot of diversity of pollen available in the environment, and they do in fact go after plants sometimes that have no nectaries. Isn't it cool that it's called the nectary, where the nectar is produced in the plant? Take for example, ragweed. So ragweed's producing, their tongue doesn't go out, they're not getting nectar from it. So their tongue stays back, and instead they're just running all over the plant, and they're getting all the pollen that they can. So I had bees that were collecting pollen from ragweed. So no nectar reward at all. So these are pollen gatherers. Are there bees that collect both pollen and nectar at the same time? Yes, absolutely. For example, when they go on dandelions, they're collecting nectar, because you'll see their proboscis out, their tongue goes out, they're getting the nectar, they're also grooming the pollen back. So they're getting both rewards from a single flower. An example of a huge nectar flow that comes, but no pollen benefits the bees, would be something like milkweeds. So when you have milkweed, you're going to see the bees on the milkweed, and they're getting lots of nectar, and that's because the milkweed continues to pump nectar up onto the flower. And milkweeds have, even though it looks like it's the shape of an ice cream scoop or whatever, depending on the milkweed variety they're on, those are all individual flowers, and the bees get in there and they can visit them constantly, and the flower just keeps producing more and more. But the milkweed pollen, you want to see something weird. You look at the milkweed and you see the bees get their feet trapped in this little pollen trap that the milkweed has designed into it. And sometimes bees don't get out of it. You'll see once in a while a dead honeybee dangling from a milkweed flower. Very rare, but you see it, and that's what happened. Its foot got trapped, and the mechanism that's designed for that flower to forcibly attach its pollen to the foot of the bee. And I used to look at these bees coming back on the landing board, and they looked like they had a bunch of extra flippers on them. In fact, I thought I was looking at deformed bees, because the foot of the bee had all these little, it looked like additional feet. And they're all flapping, and they go to land and they flip-flop into the hive. And they have like little, almost amber-colored, transparent appendages on them too. And I thought, what is that about? And what it was is, that pollen is extremely sticky. And the bees don't need it, and they can't use it. They're not going to take milkweed pollen in and work it up into bee bread, and then the nurse bees are not going to use it to feed your open larvae. So what happens is they're stuck on them, and you'll see bees flying back out still with these things dangling off of them, like charm bracelets, things like that. So there's an example. They get the nectar, but they don't care about that pollen. Now, will they go from, let's see, if they're only on the milkweeds, does that mean that bee is going to go to another plant on the same flight and get pollen from another plant because all it got was nectar from the milkweed. Is it going to do that? No. That's the cool thing about bees and why they're such great pollinators, and that's because they're floral constant, which means the milkweed bees that are out there getting nectar from milkweed and getting those mean pollen pieces attached to their feet against their will, they're flying back with nothing but nectar. They're not going to any other flowers. Now, the bees that are flying out to get pollen from other flowers are exclusively visiting that species of flower. And that's why they're great, because they're not going to cross-pollinate things. See, they're only going to go to the exact same species of flower. And they tend to do that until that resource is exhausted. And there's some question about whether or not, let's say the milkweed nectar gathering bees, once they run out of milkweeds, like at the end of the year, end of the season, do they then go on to another plant? In some cases, they don't. Actually, they go into retirement. Or they may turn into water bees, which is something that they do at the end of their life. So they become the water foraging bees, and then they no longer, see, because they don't mix foraging for water with mixing with nectar. Why? Because it's kept in the honey crop. Because if they put water in their honey crop and they just got nectar from another plant, they diluted the sucrose value that they got from the flower. See? It's not a straightforward answer as you might think. So, yes, sometimes they go to plants specifically for pollen, sometimes they go specifically for nectar, sometimes they go to other plant varieties that provide both, which is pretty cool. Fascinating stuff. Question number 5 comes from Christy from Troy, Missouri. This is a follow-up to my question from 6 May. Oh yeah, birds this is where we got on this whole thing about which birds eat bees and how devastating is that to your beehives. So the birds that were leaving tracings and possibly eating bees were summer tanagers. The keepers added a makeshift hive visor, and the birds seem to no longer be a problem. The colonies are growing, and the mentees are too. I don't believe they are students of scatology, which is the study of, droppings from various animals. But at least we know what to do in our own bee yards when the time comes. So hive visors is something I put on almost all of my beehives now because it provides shade, protection, they cluster under it, it keeps water off of the landing board, snow from building up on the entrance during winter, so it has multi-purpose, and now we can add to that practical benefit of hive visors that it can deter some bees that are otherwise swooping down and birds that are snatching bees from landing boards. Can't see it when the hive visor's there. Interesting. So that's cool. Good update on that. I'll put a link to the video on how to make your own hive visors on question number 5. Question number 6, moving on. Melanie Cruz, Baxter, Florida. We have a hive that we ended up having 6 supers on. Our honey flow is over now, and we found out that when we went to pull the supers, only 2 were fully capped. Wet honey. So we were wondering if we spread those 4 supers among other hives, would those bees treat the frames like their own and finish capping them? Well, let me tell you on that, spreading uncapped honey to a bunch of other hives, they would certainly treat it like their own, but my guess is they're going to consume a lot of that honey. Here's what I would do. Keep them on that hive and let them finish their own. When you start spreading them out, because dehydrating the honey, they're also condensing it and they're moving it at night. This is why some beekeepers get frustrated. A lot of people have scales and weights on their hives, right? And then they find out the hive is losing weight. They get this really great nectar flow on, and they're bringing a lot of nectar in, and they're putting it in the cells, but they're spreading it out more than 2 times the surface area of what the finished honey will occupy. So what are they doing? They're also venting and fanning and dehydrating the honey, which means they're also, with all the moisture that they're getting out of the hive, what's happening? It's losing weight. So it looks like they're actually shedding honey or consuming honey in some cases. But that's not really what's going on. They're getting rid of the waterway, and they're getting it down below 19% moisture, and they'll even at night move the nectar from cell to cell and start to concentrate it in areas on the frames for the honey storage. So actually what's going on here, they may be reducing it profoundly as they dehydrate it, so it won't occupy the same amount of space. You'll see it start to consolidate. And that's what the bees do. So I highly recommend not becoming impatient and moving it out to other bee colonies, hoping that they'll dry it out, because the honey that gets consumed first is the uncapped honey and nectar that's already stored in your hive. So you risk losing it to less productive colonies that did not earn all of that honey. But 6 supers, that's fantastic. So my recommendation, leave them on the hive that collected it. Number 7, and you can do anything you want. These are just, by the way, my suggestions. Anything that you see on any of my videos is basically my opinion, an educated opinion based on observation. If I don't really know and I'm speculating, I'll say that. So this is from Brian, and that's his YouTube channel, Brian Schlattman. And enjoy your channel very much. I live in central Missouri, in between St. Louis and Columbia. I run a cattle ranch, so I do a lot of work with clover, and I've been keeping bees for a long time. I got the bug when I was a little boy, and my mother took me to see my grandfather in Ireland, and he raised bees. It's definitely addicting. On a recent video, you said that if you catch a swarm of bees, that you don't have to relocate them for a week or 2. I wanted to clarify that because I've done that several times and found some of the bees going back to the original spot if I do not transport them 3 miles or better. Because one thing that is a lot of work so far this year, I started out with 1 hive and now have 10. So swarm catching has been very good, but it's a lot of work moving the bees that far away. I want to let you know that I'm kind of a friend of Dr. Leo's, and I did some of the solar work on that Doug and Stacy. It says Dog and Stacy, but I think he means Doug and Stacy off grid. Dr. Leo does a lot of his YouTube. Anyway, let's talk about this. So I've been keeping bees for a while, and whenever I catch a swarm right in my own apiary, I put it right in the apiary. I mean, it could be 10 feet away from the hive that emitted the swarm. And is there a chance that the foragers in the swarm that you collected could return to the original hive? Sure, there's always that chance. But when they start committing and building up their brood and everything, you're going to find that they're going to more than compensate for that. And for me, it would definitely not be worth. I have 27 colonies right now, so I know that's not a lot. But if you think every time I had a swarm, I was going to load them up and haul them out, because I do have another satellite apiary now, son's property, 15 miles away. I could take them there and momentarily stage them, but you know what? It's just not worth it. The number of bees that I'm going to lose here going back to my hive, because did I lose them? No. Where'd they go? To another hive that I own. So actually, I'm not losing anything. If I get foragers back to the original hive, that hive is just reinforced again. And the other hive, maybe it's a little slower in building up. But I've been putting smaller swarms. If it's a big swarm, it gets a full-size box. If it's a smaller swarm, it gets a nucleus box. So it gets a 5-frame deep to start. And if I lose a bunch of them, so what? The buildup is fast, and those bees are still my bees, even if they go back to the original hive. So I would not be moving them, and I stand by my suggestion that when you catch a swarm, put them right in your apiary, your own swarm. Now that I think of it, I should add something to this. If you're going out and about, you've got your awesome apiary set up, 4, 5, 10 hives, whatever it is, and everything's swimming along great. Everything is fantastic. Their behavior is great. Their honey production is great. The queens are good. The varroa mites are low. And you get a call that there's a swarm, 15 miles away from you, and you go get it. I highly recommend that swarm not come back to your apiary. I highly recommend, just like if you're a tropical fish enthusiast and you have a hospital tank, you don't bring something new, put it into your main tank and risk getting disease from that unknown origin fish. Unknown origin bees should be treated the same. You should have them in another apiary away from your own until you understand their disposition, their productivity, disease potential, because they could have absconded from wherever they were. It might not just be a swarm. They could have departed due to disease. And you need to know that. So you need to make these observations because heaven forbid, and I know this is greatly reduced, but if they had American foul brood or European foul brood, let's say, which is the reason why they absconded, and now they're a swarm and you collected them, they would be carrying that right into your apiary. Worst case scenario. Very rare because that is largely under control, thank goodness. But other issues. So I would keep unknown origin swarms away from your apiary, and swarms that you know came from your hives, and you know they're right there, 20 feet away in a tree. Those are yours. I would put them in a box right in the apiary, not give it a second thought, because you're keeping all your bees no matter what. It's just a matter of which box they're in. And 99% of my swarms that I collect make it and survive winter. The only ones that did not survive winter were the ones that I collected at the end of September, beginning of October, because once you hive them, you're 30 days out from having new workers in that hive. So, yes. So if you just want to confirm that that's what I'm saying, that's what I'm saying. Again, just a suggestion, but it works for me really well here. Question number 8, Rolando. Hi Fred, nice video as always. How's it going with the Layens hive? Do you like it? Nice brief question. So I already answered that. I did a Layens hive video. For those of you who haven't seen it, we did a Layens hive inspection. And speaking of swarms, I took one of my own swarms, May 10th. Nice big swarm in the tree. So a prime swarm, spring swarm, laying queen, big numbers. Put them right into my Layens hive. I set up 5 of the Layens frames. And then I had the follower board. So as far as the bees, no, that's it. But Layens frames, 5 of them, they're deep. So, and they're doing really well. In fact, they are increasing their numbers rapidly. So the same problems exist for me with the Layens hive, and that is because I have Langstroth equipment. Nothing's compatible with the Layens hive. I can't swap frames and stuff, even though a lot of people I know, there are ways to cut your Langstroth frame and fit it into the Layens frame and make these adaptations and everything else. All things I did not want to do. So I was stubborn and I only wanted to introduce a swarm. I also didn't open the Layens hive. I set it up with a single entrance because there are 3 entrances along the length of it. I have 1 entrance in the northeast corner. And I let the bees go through that entrance and occupy the hive themselves. So I didn't even open the hive and pull frames and shake them in and put the frames back. I left everything in place, hive closed up, let the bees walk through the entrance, which they did perfectly. They occupied it. Here we are, we did an inspection yesterday or the day before, and they're wall-to-wall bees and required expansion. So I think that's going to be a powerful colony. And they're going great guns. I enjoy the hive. I like it a lot. Now, I did depart from Dr. Leo. I bought that hive from him. It was what he said is the #1 selling hive, the best hive that he sells. The Layens hive, insulated with lamb's wool and all of that. Sheep's wool, I don't know if it was just lamb's. That's in my head, lamb's wool. But it came unfinished, ready to go, frames. I also bought the wax foundation, which should be used nicely. And they're using it all the way to the bottom, by the way. So full frames. And here's where I departed from Dr. Leo. I insulated the top. It was an uninsulated cover. You can pick your own insulation design for that. You should always insulate the cover of your hive. People have asked me about the vent holes on either end. I close those off. Once again, Dr. Leo leaves them open. He's in Ozarks, the Ozarks of Missouri. And here I am in the state of Pennsylvania. But I closed off all the upper vents. They only have the single entrance, and that entrance is closed off by half. So I even reduced the entrance that is on there. I also don't have plans to open any of the other entrances along the front. Why won't I do that? Because keep in mind, I want my brood to be concentrated in those first 5 frames near the entrance. If I create other entrances and other venting along the length of that Langstroth or Layens hive, not a long Lang, but if I have the Layens hive and I open those vents further down, or I have upper venting and things like that, my queen can end up laying in any available cells because she actually is out of space now. Until the brood that's in there, the capped brood, until they're emerging from that brood and making those cells available again for the queen, if you add it up, there were 5 frames. 4 out of 5 of those frames were covered in capped brood. We're talking about easily 15,000 new bees, which are going to emerge very soon. So the numbers are going to increase like crazy. But I like the hive. Easy to check, easy to inspect. You can't do any supplemental feeding on the top. They keep it all closed up. The way the lands frames are, they close the top. They create this barrier. They propolize everything nice. And not feeding the bees, even though it was a swarm, they built up just as fast. So I'm starting to question. We use sugar syrup to make a newly hived swarm feel at home and kind of to anchor them there. You can also pull brood frames and things like that if you want to. But I like to just see if without any reinforcement, they'll just occupy the hive. So all the swarms that are hived this year, so we're talking about 7. That's why I have 27 colonies of bees now. And even gave away some swarms. So we have 27 colonies of bees. 7 of those were swarms and they weren't fed. They were just put in boxes. So maybe I've never had to feed them, but it does, if you're trying to get them to stay, you provide those resources. I do have sugar syrup on my observation hive. So that's the first observation hive of 3 in my Way to Bee Academy building. So I did put that on there because they have nothing. All the frames are new, all the foundation is new, heavy wax, and they're drawing the comb out. So I'm boosting them. Maybe that's cheating a little bit. But I like the Layens hive. Now here's the thing. If you're brand new to beekeeping and you're just getting started, this is probably helpful to you. The most popular and compatible equipment is always going to be Langstroth gear, and that's almost worldwide. Langstroth frame, all the the feeders are designed for it, the boxes are designed for it. It's just a matter of whether you're using 8 or 10 frame, and then you have deep or medium or shallow supers to put on. But the configurations are compatible with all the gear that comes out. But when you get a Layens hive, everything is unique to the Layens. So, but if you were going to go that route, maybe have nothing but Layens hives. For example, if I had 2 or 3, I'm not saying I'm going to get 2 or 3 Layens hive, and I'm not saying I'm not going to get 2 or 3 Layens hives, because the thought is crossing my mind. If I had just 2 Layens hives, then when one of them, if one of them showed up queenless and didn't have any eggs in there to make a new queen, I have some choices. If I had another Layens hive, I just go pull a frame of open brood with eggs, and I put that frame in there with them, close it up, and they can make their new queen. But on the flip side, what could I do to requeen a Layens hive when I don't have any other Layens hives to pull frames from and swap 1 to 1? I can go and find one that looks like it's making swarm preps, and they have a bunch of swarm cells in there, and I can very carefully cut out the queen cell, capped. Cut that queen cell out, and then I can get that off of there, and I can take that queen cell and I can stick it in the middle of what would be their brood frame. If they're broodless because they're queenless, then put it right there. Nurse bees will take care of it. Queen comes out. All my eggs are in one queen cell. And then she has to fly out and mate and come back, and we run that risk. Where if they were all the same, I would pull a frame. If they have a bunch of eggs, then they make multiple queen cells just as their own insurance policy. So there are advantages to having multiples, because here's the other thing, honey extraction on that. Those frames are big, and there's a special honey extractor. It costs you over $1,000 on Dr. Leo's website to get that. But if that's the kind of hives you had, if that was all the hives that you had, then you probably wouldn't mind investing in a honey extractor that size. I can tell you what, the bees like it. I've never seen big sections of brood like that. They're almost 14 inches of straight, nothing but brood. Think about it. Nice big brood areas. Moving on, question number 9. This comes from Vegan Marcella. There's a gal on one of the Facebook groups that wants to know, why is it bad to boil sugar water and give to the bees? I told her that it changes the sugar molecules to be less good for the bees, but I couldn't remember how to explain it. And could you answer the question on your next Q&A? Yeah, I'll cover it. Here's the thing. I try to tell people fail-safe methods when it comes to preparing resources for your bees. There are people that add, acidifiers to their sugar syrup. They want to create invertase. There are whole recipes for creating fondant and everything else. I don't do any of that. So I don't acidify it. I don't try to create invertase. I don't invert the sugar. We have sucrose, and it gets converted to glucose and fructose so that it can be immediately consumed by the bees. I have no problem leaving the bees to do those steps on their own and providing them just sucrose, which is, processed sugar mixed with water, and then that goes in and fed to the bees. And that's emergency feed and beginner or emergency resources for the bees. So it's not on all the hives even, for me. Now the risks come in when you're making HMF, if you caramelize your stuff, if you overboil. Now what happened if somebody, because here's the thing, people get really hard and fast on specific formulas for everything. So I'm going to provide you with a link. I didn't write it on here, but I'm going to provide a link for those who want the recipes, the temperature tolerances, and the potential negative impact on the bee gut, the bee microbiome, what acidification does, and what sustained high temperature can do when you're trying to make your sugar syrup. That link will be down in the video description, and you can go and you can read the entire study. But when I'm teaching fail-safe aspects of preparations for your bees, I'm not a chef, I'm not a chemist, and so I don't want to get into tight parameters and risk giving my bees something that potentially could not be good for them. So one thing I know for sure, if I don't bring it to a boil, I'm not going to overcook my syrup, and my bees are going to be safe. They just might have to have another step in there and create the invertase themselves, which bees are fully capable of doing. When they go out to flowers, they're collecting sucrose. They're not collecting inverted sugar syrup. So they're designed to do it on their own. If I don't boil it, I don't risk creating any secondary materials in the syrup that could harm the bees. So that's why I teach everybody that's new that that's what you provide for your bees if you have to put sugar syrup in there. Now, it comes into play when people want to do 2-to-1 sugar syrup. Let me get this right. So if you had a gallon of water, you're putting 16 pounds of dry sugar in that gallon of water. And of course, the thinking is that this gives the bees a heavy enough syrup that they will be fortifying their resources late in the year. You got a colony of bees that are too light, they don't have enough resources for winter for whatever reason. And now you're going to fortify that with a heavy syrup. And that's where really heating up the water comes into play, because to get that much sugar to dissolve into 8 pounds of water, 1 gallon of water, is hard. It's hard to do. And it may not go into solution unless it's really elevated in temperature, and that's where the risks come in. Bringing it up until it starts to boil and shutting it down immediately is probably totally safe. I don't want anybody to take that risk. So that's why I don't teach it. And the other thing is, for winter emergency resources now, I have one picked out. So based on last year's performance, and that's, so you got to really ask, well, why are you feeding that and when are you feeding that? Do you have a dearth, a period where nothing is coming in, and you're really wanting to sustain your bees? So you have to ask yourself then too, why do you need to fortify the bees in a period of dearth, which is a normal rhythm where you live? Because commercial beekeepers have to do it. Their livelihood is based on the number of bees in each hive, and if they're going out for pollinator services and things like that, their hives have to make the grade, which means the number of bees on every frame and the number of bees in the hive, and they even get bonuses for boosted numbers of bees in these hives when they go out to whatever the pollination contract is. The biggest one in the United States is the almond groves in California. But backyard beekeeping, see? What is the end of the world for you if they go into a dearth period and the queen backs off from laying because resources are not out there? Do you really need to fortify them? Because they naturally will reduce their numbers on their own. And that's a great time for you to evaluate them for varroa destructor mites. And if you're going to be a treatment beekeeper, if you're going to treat for varroa mites, you do a count then, broodless cycle, you have like 96% efficacy against the rhodostructure mite right there for that period until the next bloom starts kicking in and things go on. So I don't know that artificially stimulating a healthy full-size colony is worth your time if you're just a backyard beekeeper. So smaller colonies overall are healthier, easier to manage. You're probably not going to get 6 supers of honey off of one of those smaller colonies, but do you want to have to artificially boost your bees in order for that to happen? Or do you want to just happen to have a great year? Because for us, the next nectar flow, we have no dearth period where I live, so I'm lucky. So I don't fortify any colonies. There's no syrup on any colony right now except the observation hive. So even the new nuke, I'm doing an experiment too that I'm not going to tell you about. But later on, I'm going to do a video because I'm doing a long-range video to show the beginning and the end all in one video, which is something I like to do. But so questioning whether or not you should be boiling the sugars, adding things to it, I'm going to leave that up to you, but I'm going to provide you with the information on the research, and you can make the decision yourself. But I personally don't make anything that goes in my beehives that requires me to boil it, heat it, as far as, and add things. I don't acidify it and things like that. So I just don't, because the bees can do it on their own, and my colonies were too strong in spring. In an area where some commercial beekeepers had profound losses, by the way. So something is happening right in my apiary, or maybe I'm just in a perfect spot where the bees are getting the right diversity of forage, because the nectar that they're going to get on their own is going to be way better than what we're going to provide them with in sugar syrup. Now, some people do come in often and say, well, sugar syrup's really bad for them, hurts the bees, it's terrible, it's the other white stuff when it comes to kids, it's worse than cocaine. Okay, now I'm not going to have that discussion at all, but it's been long proven that if you give your bees processed sugar, whether that's beet sugar or cane sugar, that's also proven not to make much of a difference at all. It is just sucrose. It's a carbohydrate that the bees use for energy. And obviously, once your nectar flows, you don't use any of that because you don't want that making its way into your highly nutritious honey. So, and that link you can send to the person on Facebook, and they can read it and see what their limitations are. It doesn't mean that if you boil your sugar syrup, the minute it gets to a boil, it's bad for the bees, it's going to kill them and everything else. There are risks associated with it that you should be informed about, that's all. So, next one, question number 10, John McNeil. I wonder how many times that is going to happen, although you do splits. And that's because honeybee swarm control, get them to land where you can reach them. So that's another video that I did last week. And that was because I used a synthetic queen mandibular pheromone that I get from Better Bee. Earlier in the year, the bees just seem to be, when they're swarming out, and you can do everything perfect, and your bees can swarm. That is what your bees do. That's what they're designed to do. It's biology. They're going to reproduce. They reproduce in your hive every day when they're making new bees, but they also reproduce as a superorganism when they create a new colony of bees. That's why they're still here. Bees that swarm and generate new colonies guarantee their future. If they never swarmed, if you had a line of bees that never swarmed and stayed in their hive all the time, you run the risk of, if that colony died, who's replacing them? So they are prolific, and they need to be. But so one of the things that I had a problem with is they were getting higher and in the trees out of reach, and I was using the Colorado bee vac, and my tallest ladder and everything else has to be a freestanding ladder because the tree wouldn't support a ladder, that type of thing. And I decided to pull this QMP, queen mandibular pheromone, and this is a synthetic imitation of the scent that a queen bee would put out. The purpose of this QMP is to, when you find a colony of bees that is missing the queen, or you suspect they're missing the queen, we want to prevent laying workers from activating their ovaries. So workers, every worker in the beehive is a female. They have their reproductive equipment in their biology. So part of their anatomy includes their reproductive organs. They are just suspended in the presence of a queen that has the pheromones of a queen that demonstrates that, number one, she is a queen, she's a female, and she's fertile, and she's in lay. That suppresses these workers from activating their own reproductive system. In the absence of the queen, in the absence of her pheromone, workers get agitated, and of course they'll make a replacement queen if there are eggs available. Now, if there are no eggs available, they can't do it. So they gradually begin to mature as productive females, and they will be capable of laying eggs. This generally happens based on lots of science and observation. At the 3-week mark, they're capable of beginning to lay. Now, in that 21-day period, we have an opportunity to suppress their reproductive biology, right? So we do that with a synthetic queen. So it's a fake queen, this synthetic QMP that goes in there. And there's 2 of them in a pack, and they're dirt cheap. They're like $5 and something for 2 of them. And you put that in your hive, and that's a placeholder until you can get a replacement in. So that would be your placeholder until you fly in a replacement queen, or you get one from another hive, or whatever it is you plan to do. But it keeps you from having to deal with laying workers. That's the intention of it. It also works if you're setting up a system where you're going to bank queens, like if you're producing queen cells and you want to have a colony of nothing but nurse bees that are going to attend to your queens. You're going to put in there in the hair curler cages or whatever you want to call them, and then they'll feed those queens and keep them viable until you can send them out to your mating yards or whatever it is you're going to do. And so QMP allows you, again, there's a synthetic pheromone there that makes all of those nurse bees remain in a mode where they would attend to new brood, and they would also attend to queens. So it works for that. So we're faking out the bees a lot here with chemistry. So what I did is, and this was a big eye-opener for a lot of reasons. One is I took the Ziploc ties out. They come with their own zip ties, by the way, conveniently. And I took the QMP out, and I put some on thin branches of a tree, and I put some on thicker branches of a tree, because I wanted to see, once they get on a branch, if it's too thin, will a swarm of bees collect on that and the branch will sag to the ground or whatever, or will they opt for the thicker branch that has the same pheromone? So because it's synthetic, all these pheromones are identical. So it isn't like the bees flew out of their hive and recognize the scent of their queen. They follow the scent of another queen. And this is why when you find that your bees in swarm season, which we're in right now, and swarm season is going to continue right through June, where I live, bees frequently land on the exact same tree and often the exact same branch that previous swarms have collected on. And that's because with their keen sense of smell, bees recognize that other queens have been there. They find the pheromone and they collect there with their queen. And then it constantly reinforces that tree branch, that tree, that location, and that's why other subsequent swarms go and land there as well. So now I wanted to derail those and mess with their politics again and get my QMP and put that on branches, and it worked like a charm. So now instead of 14 feet up, I have when a swarm emits from one of your colonies, and they're looking for a place to bivouac, and this is a temporary parking spot for the bees. This is not their final destination. That's why we don't use it as a lure to get bees to go into a swarm trap, because that's an entirely different thing. They don't necessarily want to move in where the pheromone of another queen exists. They don't want to bring their queen into contact in a cavity with another queen and have a queen battle. So I highly recommend not using synthetic QMP as an attractant in a swarm trap. Use burr comb and propolis and bits of things like that as your lure for that, because that's previously occupied. There's no sense that a queen lives there now. You can also use Swarm Commander. That's proven to work and gets immediate scouts checking things out. So this is to encourage the bees to have an intermediate bivouac location while they search for their final cavity. And this gives you the opportunity to collect that swarm and hive them. But this is where my observations got, it worked. First of all, the swarm landed eye level right there, got them, put them in a hive. You know, the next day, another swarm went, same spot, same branch. In fact, I thought it was the same swarm. I thought they had moved out of where I put them, and now they went back to the branch, which was not the case. It's another swarm. And then something interesting happened. I started to wonder about, first of all, it was a small swarm. And so sometimes you have an unmated queen that flies out. After swarms, fairly common, you get these tiny clusters. But what I noticed happening was bees were joining this from a lot of different directions. So I started to wonder if foraging bees and bees that are already out on the wing, when they encounter another swarm, sometimes they just voluntarily join up with a swarm that's leaving, because they were building from a lot of directions after the swarm had settled, and I knew which colony they had come from. I've got bees from other areas coming and collecting on the swarm. So what the QMP did was took what would have been a medium-sized swarm, and if I left them there for a day, because it's the other part I wanted to see, you know, they just move on eventually. They kept building and building. Normally your swarm, they pick a site, they collect on it, and then they condense down as they tighten and get quiet for the overnight. But what these were doing was still drawing, they were drawing in bees from all over, and I think it's because of the QMP. I think that bees tend to join swarms because they happen to see a swarm, and they just join the party. And I can't validate that. It's just observations that I'm making while I'm drinking my coffee and looking at, well, that bee came from over there, and this bee's coming in from over here. And it's not like they were following the swarm and moving together and then collecting. These bees are coming from across a field, and hey, there's a swarm, and joining up. So the QMB can actually turn a medium swarm into a much larger swarm. And somebody said, where do you get them? I get them from Better Bee. They're actually kind of hard to find unless you look up QMP at Better Bee. You find it quicker Googling than going to their website. Their website, you have difficulty searching for it. And you keep them in the freezer. So the next question I was getting a lot of here, along the same line, how long does it last? Will it wear out on the branch? And remember what I said before, that each time a swarm collects, they're refreshing their own pheromones on there. Other queens have been there. And then that keeps reinforcing that this branch is the place to land. And they're going to keep coming back to it. Now, to try that out, I did go back and clipped off the little zip ties, took those away and put them in a Ziploc baggie and got them out of the pheromone stream altogether. And there was another tiny, what I suspect again is an unmated virgin queen that took off. She's got a little fist-sized collection of bees with her. And I just pointed that out to my wife this morning, that look at this little cluster. There's a queen bee in there, and she's just not mated, so she didn't have any clout politically. And so I took away the pheromone QMP, the synthetic pheromone, and they did not continue to build on there. So the follow-up experiment to that would be, once there is a tiny cluster, right? And you see them on a branch and they're worthless. Nobody's going to want that swarm. But I'm playing with them. So you take another QMP and you zip it further up the branch, closer to the tree than the little cluster there, because we want it to be on a stronger part of the branch. Put your little zip tie within a few inches, that tiny cluster. Watch it build up overnight. So you tell me what's going on there. I just got a bunch of volunteers to come in and reinforce an unmated virgin queen swarm. Interesting stuff. Something new every day, and that's exciting to me. It's a lot of fun. For $5, get QMP and play with it. By the way, don't get it on you. Keep it in its little Ziploc baggie. Wear, gloves or whatever. I just use the Ziploc bag itself to hold it while I zip tie it. I don't touch it with my fingers, because if you smell like that, now you're the swarm magnet. Moving on, question number 11, Daryl Hammer. Let's see. We're hobby beekeepers with 12 hives. We do all our extraction by hand, and it works fine for us. And one problem we have is separating the wax cappings from the honey that is cut off with them. We let them sit overnight in a sieve over a 600 micron filter. I'm saying that clearly because that's the part I want to really talk about here. On top of a 5-gallon bucket. We stir the cappings occasionally, so more honey will drain, and we then spread the cappings on a flat surface outside and let the bees work them over for a day. And there is a possibility of spreading disease, I guess, but we're willing to risk it. Very low possibility of spreading disease that way, unless the hive that you took it out of has some kind of foul brood, some kind of brood disorder or disease that would carry on. So I'm not totally against what you're describing here. And much honey is still mixed with the cappings, but we then wash the cappings with running water. At this point, we begin the wax melting. Our question is there an easier way to do this and not waste that much? So anyway, I want to get into that 600 micron filter. I don't recommend that you use a filter. Well, you could use 600 micron. That would let a lot go through it. One of the ways that you can handle it is that's going to let one of the reasons that people use kind of coarse filters is because they want all the pollen to get through it. So the question is, how fine could it be and still have pollen go through? So kind of the rule of thumb there is I'm going to talk you into another micron filter that will help reduce how quickly your honey solidifies later also. So I'm going to show you this. This is a milk filter. And we're talking 600 microns there. This is all the way down to a 200 micron. And if you're having troubles getting it through a 600 micron, this is going to be a bottleneck for you too. But what I want you to do is to heat it up. And that's why I have, the other side of the room that I'm sitting in right now. I have one of those Vivo Sun indoor grow rooms. So it's like a big tent system. And if I were bringing in honey for that, I would put it on the rolling rack system that I have. I would put one of these over a bucket. These have the little tabs on them that sit on it. You can stick with your 600 if you want, but that stuff is going to crystallize pretty fast because that's a lot of particulates getting in there. The finer the filter, the warmer it has to be to go through it. And so I do two things at once. I run a dehumidifier in there, which has a fan built into it. And the dehumidifier, even when it's off, is generating a lot of heat in there. So it gets into the 90s. So what else is in the 90s? The interior of your beehive. So that makes it flow faster. You're going to get more honey through your filter, and you can use a finer filter. So, and then that goes into the bucket, and then that is what we pour off. But by warming it up like that, the other thing is they make these, this one sits on the bucket, which is great because you can put it in and go away. And you're drying it out a little bit. Plus I have fans in there too if the honey is at all wet. So if you're at 19% or below, no reason to dry it out anymore. But putting that in that tiny warm space speeds up everything you're about to do with it. The other thing is you can get these milk filters as a bag. So you can put it all in there and you can actually wring it out and squeeze it. These things are really tough and they're dirt cheap. They're like $7. So you can put that in there and then squeeze more out of it. And the same thing when you go to put that out to let the bees feed on it, they'll also clean up your filter for you. And then later you just rinse it all off. So I recommend the milk filters, 200 microns, warmer temperatures, into the 90s, no problem. You're still raw honey and everything else. At 200, you still have pollen going through it. And if you're looking for something, because this can also happen at the end of the year, that's why I'm bringing up this Vivo Sun room that we have. Mine is only 24 inches by 48 inches by 60 inches. And that's all the space I need to do. But they make bigger ones. So if you even have a bigger group, that allows you to completely control the climate. What else doesn't happen in there? You're not going to see dust particles and things like that that could otherwise get into your honey. So you can also set open jars on a rack in there and dehumidify your honey without particulates being added to that. So that's a quicker method for me. Like if I take my whole thing of, because your uncapping tank gets a lot of honey in it, but you have all these particles in it. So I always take my uncapping stuff and I run it through those filters and I heat them up. And run it through a 200 micron filter so that I get a much longer time before they solidify. It is going to set eventually, but if you're selling honey right away or collecting it or using it right away, fewer particles in it. But everything else you're doing is just fine. So, question number 12, rapid round bee feeder. Well, so here we go, and this is the reason that we have my opening thumbnail showing the two different feeders. I watched many YouTube videos and I thoroughly enjoy all of them. I'm a little perplexed by my experience with the rapid round drowning bees. So let's look at these feeders. Now this is the yellow rapid round feeder. There's a bigger one that's white. And this is well made, but your bees come up through the central riser here. There's ridges so they can keep their footing. This keeps them from swimming out into the open area. It also cuts down on the surface area so that your bees are not trying to dehumidify the entire feeder full of sugar syrup. And the reason that I've liked these in the past, still do, is because they can be used for dry feed, and they can also be used for liquid, so they can be used for syrup. So in the wintertime, you put that on, pull this off. Now you've got this lid, and you've got dry sugar in here. The bees come up to the center. You're not just venting a bunch of air off through the top of it, and they're moving around, and they're getting dry sugar if they want to. But I have to tell you now that you're not going to see a lot of rapid rounds on my beehives in winter anymore. In fact, it's probably safe to say you're not going to see any rapid rounds on my beehives in winter anymore. So these are out for me. And that's because the Hive Alive fondant did so well last winter. And it's a one-piece thing. You know, you cut your little circle in it, you put it over the hole, it stayed there all winter. None of my bees consumed all of it. Every colony that had that on there did well, came through winter, did fine. No reason to give them dry sugar in the future for me. Hive Alive fondant is what I'm going to be using as my winter feed. But now, keeping your bees from drowning when you put sugar syrup on, for whatever reason that you need it, I'm going to talk about a couple of things here. Well, one is I started putting socks on these. So that's my video that shows how to overcome some of the issues and problems that we're having with these. There's no better replacement for this right now. These are convenient. You come out with a replacement. You pull this one up, you put a new one on, fill it up, you go and clean, sanitize this one. They're inexpensive. You can have a bunch of them on your shelf and ready to go, which is what I do. But then the bees get over, and especially if they're really hungry and they push each other, you've got this little cone here, and the bees will push each other down the sides right into the syrup. Now here's where the consistency of your syrup plays a lot in how well the potential survival rate of your bees in the feeder will be. So one is you've done everything you can. You put your sock on there or whatever you did. And the other thing is keep it full, because when it gets to the bottom there, bees are able to actually push this top up a little bit, and they get out from under it, and they get out into the syrup, and they drown in it. So the more viscous your syrup is, 2 to 1, your bees get into 2 to 1 sugar syrup, and they drown easily. So if it's a heavy syrup, they cannot get out of it on their own. And other bees just end up standing on each other and drinking the syrup right on top, and they don't even care. The next one gets pushed in, and they just keep piling them up, and that's where people get alarmed. You open this up, and there's 20 or 30 dead bees in here, and you'd like to see no dead bees. So the other part of that is if you do 1-to-1 sugar syrup, the bees tend to, even if they fall in, they tend to be able to get out of it pretty easily. So the lighter syrups, more survival for the bees. But let's say you don't want to play with that. You don't want any dead bees. You don't want to see one dead bee. So these tanks, we've talked about these through the years. This is by Bee Smart Designs. Look at the difference in the tank design now. The old tanks had square shoulders. They had a habit of slouching down, and that expressed a bunch of syrup into your hive. They had issues before. And that's why, let me show you what I did. This is the old tank, this is the new tank. They look like they would be different capacities, actually. And I know if you're listening to this as a podcast, you can't see it. You probably want to look at the video to see that. If you really want to see, that's the old tank, this is the new tank. See the difference? Now this one I made it so that I put a bunch of wooden blocks here so that it couldn't settle down, and it would keep it so that, first of all, it would use all the syrup, because once it sagged, the syrup lingered here. Also, if it was tilted at all, most hives are tilted towards the landing board. If that's the case, you'd have syrup in here that didn't come out. So that's the old one. This is the new one. So the bottom looks the same to me. No, actually, even the bottom's different. This one has a protruding centerpiece there. The new one does not. So it's pretty flat. So you can set this on your inner cover that has the hole in it. This goes right over the hole, and you've got, looks like you've got 7, 8 holes in the middle there. So you've got these little holes, and the bees can feed. There's zero opportunity for the bees to get up into the syrup and to die. The other end of it is you're not going to put dry feed in this. So this is liquid syrup only, and so when you're going to put that on there, if you use this Bee Smart Designs, I'm sure it's called the Ultimate Hive Feeder, the Ultimate 3-Season Feeder, but no compression anymore. It doesn't sag at all, and because it's kind of shaped like a water tower, if your hive is tilted a little bit too, you're still going to drain it completely. And there's just a gasket in here. Now some people put these in a space. Your medium super box will keep that off the bottom, but it even comes with these little feet. So if you wanted to set this on a flat surface, like if you used 2 of them, these hold a gallon, by the way. That's a lot. If you use 2 of them, so you had the hole in the middle and you had these off to the sides, you would put these feet on to create the standoff so the bees can get underneath and feed here if there was not a hole underneath of it. So this is the absolute drown-proof method, and it will handle 1-to-1 syrup, 2-to-1 syrup, anything you want. And you can even put, I tested it with Pro Sweet, because Pro Sweet's the heaviest syrup you can get out there. It's made by Man Lake, and that is the consistency of honey. It has the weight of honey. So that's what I tested that in, and did not slouch or deform at all. So that's the new one, the Bee Smart Designs 3-Season Feeder. And you can find those everywhere. You just Google it. You could go to their website, Bee Smart Designs website. You could go to Better Bee carries their stuff. Amazon carries their stuff. And so that's an alternate for the wrap it around for liquid feed. So you want to absolutely have not a single dead bee. That's the way to do it. You can also go to jars, inverted jars with holes in the lids and things like that. But it's much easier to put a whole gallon on there if you want to have a consistent flow of imitation nectar, which is what the sugar syrup really is, and that keeps them building comb. So that's it for number 12. Get this off of here. Number 13, last question for the day. This comes from Brad from Chester, New Hampshire. I have a new nuke of Pollen VSH bees. VSH stands for Varroa Sensitive Hygienic. And thinking of doing something a little different concerning Varroa mite control. Since they are Varroa sensitive, I'm planning to hit them with an OA treatment. OA is like oxalic acid. Said in 3 days, if I have 0 dead mites on the screen bottom board, I will assume I have no or very low mite load. If I even find 1 mite, then I will do an alcohol wash. I know it is not in keeping with the norm, but what would be the downside? Okay, so actually, I like that. When you have a bottom board that's removable, so when you have a screen bottom board, you've got an insert. If you have like the flow hives, for example, they have trays in them that you can pull them out. I always tell people, my mentees that have trays and flow hives, pull them out, clean them, make sure there isn't a speck in there, and they're white, except for the brand new ones that are now kind of yellow. You put those in there and you see what falls on them over a period of time. So 5 days, a week, whatever. If you went 5 days or a week with a tray or removable bottom panel and you did not find a Varroa destructor mite, I would be good in saying that they're clear. Some mites are going to hit the bottom. It's not an accurate count, but it will tell you if they're present or not. The other thing is I like to do is do a pre-Varroa mite treatment count for 72 hours. And then if you're doing oxalic acid vaporization, we do that mite treatment and watch them drop like flies, dead mites all over the place. And then wait 72 hours, clean everything off, put it back in, and see if you collect any more. You can do an oxalic acid vaporization treatment after you think you have 0 mites and do another hit and leave your bottom board in there and see what kind of mite count you get on the bottom again. So, and if you get just 1 or 2 after another mite treatment, you are good to go, in my opinion. But if you clean everything up, the problem is other detritus falls on the bottom and gets into these boards, so an extended observation time frame may not be very helpful, but it will show you if you have mites at all. But 72 hours, see what your mite drop is. And remember, these are mites that are dying of old age. Some of them are groomed off because you have VSH bees, so you should see them. If you've got the Purdue mite maulers and things like that, ankle biters, you can look at your mites and see if they've been damaged by your bees. The other thing is you can put mineral oil or PAM cooking spray and things like that down there to make sure that you trap your mites in place when they do fall down and they don't crawl back out and up. Now, if you've got solid bottom boards and things like that, you're not going to see mites like this. So that's not a method that's open to you. So those without, because there's another name for these trays and screens in the bottom, they're part of IPM, which is Integrated Pest Management. The whole plan of that is so that mites and things that fall through the screen can't reattach themselves to your bees and get back up. So I have nothing wrong at all with this plan or thinking. So that's it. We're in the fluff mode today. So we're wrapping it up. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about, we just had our Memorial Day weekend. And so everybody was planting, and I planted my property too. So here's what I planted because people want to know. I used mixed sunflowers. So I have the dwarf sunflowers that are about knee high or whatever. And of course all the other varieties, because the pollen from sunflowers has been proven to be medicinal for your beehive. So it's not just good for rearing bees. It has a medicinal aspect to it. You can look that up and find out more if you want to. I also planted anise hyssop, which is a perennial. It's going to keep coming up, so it's kind of in the mint family. Very strong scent. Bees love it. I also am continuing to expand swamp milkweed. I have milkweed groves that grow. And the whole point of these different plantings is to cascade the resources for the bees, and this is over many acres of land, by the way. So swamp milkweed, good for the bees, great nectar, bad for pollen. They don't need milkweed pollen, but the milkweeds need the bees. So those are perennials. Those are just going to keep coming. So the hyssop and the milkweed cosmos also is what I'm planting again this year because we had such a great time with it last year. And this year my issues are, last year I planted a bunch of sunflowers and people didn't think I did. And that's because over more than 2 acres, woodchucks, which are marmots, they're called groundhogs, whistle pigs, whatever you want to call them, went out and were biting off my sunflowers by the hundreds in a single morning. So you would see them clear cutting. They weren't even eating them. They were just laying down on their sides. So woodchucks are not my friends right now. This year, I'm trying to keep woodchucks out of all of my sunflower grove. So if you've got ideas on that, please write that down in the comment section below. The other thing is the way to bee building. Some people wanted to know about that. It's up and running. We have one observation hive in. It's occupied. It's doing fantastic. The whole room sounds like bees, which is exactly what I wanted to happen. We have 2 other observation hives, and they are deep frame observation hives, groups of 3 instead of the old groups of 2 from Bonterra bees. So I did not get these from Bonterra bees, so I'm reviewing another company's observation hives. I was going to build my own, but then I decided, wow, these are already in triples and they're already deeps. It's ready to go. So now I'm just going to put them up and mount them to the walls in there. And so we'll have different colonies to look in on at all different times, but the whole room will sound like bees all the time. And they have darkened hive panels. And so they're closed up all the time, and you can open them and do your studies and look and see what's going on. So I'm looking forward to that coming along. That's fantastic. Still up in the air. People are asking if they can come and study bees here, and you cannot. And the reason is insurance. I can't have students here, so I don't know what I'm doing yet. What else? Oh yeah, the shout out. I didn't do a shout out last week because we didn't do the Q&A last week. So the very last thing, this is a channel that I looked at because I was thinking, let's do something different. So one of the things that people like to do is customize their beehives. They like to paint bees and pictures and pyrography, and some people do laser etching and laser cutting and things like that. And so horizontal bees, for example, his wife does fantastic artwork on all of their beehives. It's really excellent. So go to horizontal bees and check out their artwork, but that's not my shout out for today. My shout out is the channel name is Samita Art, SAMITA ART, Samita Art. So what she did was, because I wanted people to learn, I used to teach art, and I used to teach photography, and I enjoy teaching, and I enjoy seeing people learn to create stuff on their own. So I was thinking, maybe you would be interested in learning how to paint bees and things like that with acrylics on your beehives and equipment. So today's shout out is for this video. It's called Honey Bee on a Flower, Painting for Beginners, and it's acrylic. Acrylic is good because you can wash your brushes in water and things like that. It's not like oil paints. And she did a really good painting of a honeybee on a flower. It looked like it was on a daisy. So that's my shout out for today. Please look for the link for that video down in the video description. And I cannot believe how few people have looked at her work. That honeybee painting is fantastic. So I just want to thank you for spending your time with me today, and I hope that your bees are doing well and that these Q&As continue to benefit you. I am going to be doing more videos out in the bee yard. You are going to see more hands-on stuff. We are going to look into the long Langstroth hive and everything else. So thanks a lot for your patience with me. The weather is finally agreeing with getting out and getting into beehives. Have a fantastic weekend. Thanks for watching.